There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 meeting of the Investment Committee. Happy New Year. Yes, you are in the right committee. I am chair of the Investment Committee today. Unfortunately, several of our board members are affected by the fires down south. And so we are going to continue getting the work done. Some people will be with us virtually, and we're going to, with the support of each other, get through the work today. Steve, could we start by taking attendance?
Yes, good morning. For the Director of Finance, Ms. Perot.
Present.
Mr. Tang.
Present.
Ms. Yamamoto.
Here.
Mr. Gunning.
Here.
And for the State Treasurer, Mr. Ruffino.
Present.
And Mr. Juarez. And then do we have Controller Cohen virtually? I'm told we do.
Jonathan, we have Controller Cohen virtually, correct? Okay.
And then Mr. Keeley virtually? Maybe there's no audio. And perhaps Ms.
Oh, I see a thumbs up, yes.
Ms. Hendricks?
So just to clarify, we're set up for closed session and they can't speak to us at this moment because of extra security. So
we'll just note.
We're speaking for them.
We'll note their presence, and Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you.
And then
Did you want to add something, Brian, or you're good?
I just didn't know the answer to whether or not Ms. Hendricks was on.
She is not. She is probably flying at the moment. Okay. Okay. We have a quorum. We need to approve the agenda. Second. It's been moved and seconded. Without objection, we will approve today's agenda. And that brings us to item number 2, which is closed session. So I will leave it to Scott and Cassandra to make sure we have the correct audience for closed session. We will remain in this big room. Welcome back to, I'm echoing. Welcome back to the open session of the Investment Committee. We are going to start again with attendance.
Okay, for the Director of Finance, Ms. Perot. And for the Controller, Ms. Gallegos.
Present.
Mr. Tang.
Present.
Ms. Yamamoto.
Here.
Mr. Gunning.
Here.
And for the State Treasurer, Mr. Ruffino.
Present.
And for the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Saunders.
Present.
And Mr. Juarez.
Here.
And do we have Mr. Keeley virtually?
No,
No,
we do
that's
not.
right. Okay, and so, Madam Chair, you have a quorum, and I have a
Thank you.
statement that we'll go ahead and read.
Thank you, Steve.
So the CalSTRS board meetings are live web streamed, video archived, and available to the public on calstrs.com. Individuals who wish to address the board should wait for the 10-minute public comment period at the end of the agenda item the speaker wishes to address. For comments not pertaining to a specific agenda item, there will be an opportunity for additional statements at the beginning or end of the open session. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to comment. However, if there is not enough time for each speaker to have 3 minutes, then the timing will be at the discretion of the chair. And to protect the privacy of of speakers under the age of 18 who wish to address the board, only their first name and affiliated organization may be provided, but other personal identifying information such as their last name, age, or school may not be shared. Since the November Teachers Retirement Board meeting, CalSTRS has received 1 email from CFT requesting CalSTRS to divest from companies involved in military occupation, apartheid, and human rights violations. 1 email from a member urging CalSTRS to divest from fossil fuels, unjust wars, and cease investments in Chevron. 1 email from a member requesting CalSTRS to divest from ExxonMobil, citing the California Attorney General's lawsuit related to misleading claims about plastic waste recycling. and one email from a non-member requesting CalSTRS to divest from General Dynamics.
Okay, thank you. Just to update the public about closed session, we took no action in our first closed session, and I believe we do have another one, so we'll report out again after that. Let's start this morning with our teacher video.
When I started as principal, I was 40 years old, and looking back on it, I wasn't prepared, dealing with a student population of over 4,000 students. I understood the academics and what makes a good teacher, but I didn't have a clue about some of the social emotional issues that not only our students but our teachers would go through. So that was a big learning curve for me. What I'm most proud of is working with students and working with young adults and see them going from not having a clue what they want to do to knowing where they're going to go to college or what trade they want to do. It really makes me proud of getting kids and helping them with their direction of where they want to go with their future. So, my name is Tom Houts. I am principal of Downey High School. My mom is extremely proud that I'm principal of Downey High School. She was a big factor in me getting to the education field.
I took Tom to school with me, really all through his career. I would take him when I put up my bulletin boards in the fall and take him to school events at the high schools where I taught.
My wife, who's also an educator, who will be retiring the same time as me.
Being a part of Tom's life here in Downey High just makes me very proud. Also, just who he is. He's a very genuine person. He genuinely cares about his students, his families, and the community of Downey.
My son is a teacher, and my daughter is actually student teaching right now.
Absolutely respect my dad, what he stands for, the leader he is, and the integrity he has too.
We have a special relationship because he was even my principal when I went to high school. So I got to see him not only as my dad, but as what he does every day in his daily life, what he deals with, all the teachers, all the students, all the sports rallies, the assemblies.
My staff is wonderful. I've been fortunate enough to been with some of my colleagues for over 30 years.
I've been with Mr. House for a lot of years. He was a science teacher 35 years ago. But as my principal, he is a person that lets us be good teachers.
He walks around campus, he walks into classrooms, he knows the students' names, he connects with not just his staff, but with the student body. When teachers are doing a good job, he's gonna be your #1 cheerleader. And if you're not cutting the mustard, he's gonna try to figure out a way to get you there.
You can really see his impact he's had on the school and how Downey High School and Unified really, because of him, feels like a family, and it feels like everyone knows everyone. I was shocked he remembered my name in my first year. I did not think that was possible for a principal that has a school of 4,000 kids, 100 some odd teachers.
I have a wonderful job and I have a wonderful staff, and I couldn't be happier with my position or my career choice. Like most educators, I talk to my peers and I get what they know, but I really didn't have a strong foundation of STRS until I went to workshops. I learned so much in the workshops. They were so informative. I thought so highly of our workshops that we had STRS can come and give a workshop to our staff here at Downey High School. I am planning on doing a lot of traveling when I retire. My wife is also an educator, so we plan on doing a lot of travel and a lot of giving back to the community where we can afford to volunteer and we don't really have to be worrying about getting compensated for it. I still love my job, but there's other things I want to pursue.
Good for you. That was great. Brings us all back around to why we're here. All right, we are now on item number 3, opportunities for statements from the public.
Okay, our first speaker will receive a 3-minute timer. Our first speaker is Kevin.
Good morning, members of the board. Cassandra, my name is Kevin Welch. I'm the CTA chair for the retirement committee, but I'm speaking as an individual. The video that you just saw that CalSTRS always begins the meetings with reminds me, as well as the board, of the importance of the work that you do. And I am incredibly thankful every day for what you do for our 1 million plus members. We have, as you know, as I've been chair for several years now, we've had a wonderful working relationship, STRS, CTA. We brought that down to my school district. The video you just saw with Tom, he's the principal at one of my high schools. And the relationship that we have, in which CalSTRS comes down, and they're going to come down next week, and work with our members to show them the benefit of what you men and women do. It's incredible, and I want to thank you for everything you do. Teresa, thank you, as well as to the media department for what you've done for our members. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin.
Our next speaker will be Megan.
I'm much shorter. Good morning. My name is Megan McGarry, and I have been an American Sign Language interpreter for almost 10 years, a little over 9. 7 of those have been spent in video relay service industry, which is, I work for one of the largest companies, Sorensen Communications, and what I do is an essential service. It is where I process calls between spoken language users and signed language users. It's protected by law, and it is paid for with taxpayer money, and it provides communication accessibility that is absolutely important to the community that I serve. In recent years, I've seen the working conditions completely tank. They've plummeted quite a bit, and that has resulted in direct harm against both interpreters and the deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing, and deaf disabled communities that we serve and use our services. It's why I'm a member of the American Sign Language Interpreters Union that has publicly launched just last September. We're currently trying to organize interpreters between 2 companies, Sorensen, the one that I work for, as well as EP. They're the largest VRS companies in the US. We're organizing across the country, including Puerto Rico. And right now we're trying to get a card check neutrality agreement. Sorensen, however, has refused to meet with us. So why I'm here today, other than my backstory, is that CalSTRS has over $2.3 billion invested in Blackstone, which owns a 27% stake in Sorensen. They also own an undisclosed amount of debt within Sorensen. So Blackstone has said already that they will refuse to engage within Sorensen's network to try to get us to the table to get to a card check neutrality agreement. Without an interpreters union, VRS will be done. There's just so much harm that's being done to us as interpreters and to the community. So I'm here to ask for your help today. We really do need you guys to support us. We have several teachers as well that work as interpreters within VRS. And I don't want it to go away because I love this community that I serve, and it is a vital service that we need, that my community depends on. So I'm here today to ask that CalSTRS begins to engage with Blackstone about this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Our next speaker will be Alyssa.
Good morning. Alyssa Giacchino with the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. As you discuss your private markets work plan today, we encourage CalSTRS to take a proactive approach to addressing sustainability and workforce issues in private markets. CalSTRS Public Markets Corporate Governance Policy affirms that practices that create an engaged and stable workforce can provide long-term value for companies. The Public Markets Policy also defines foundational metrics to assess workforce management quality. Developing private markets investment principles is a prudent step to ensure that CalSTRS has the appropriate tools to evaluate and engage managers. Given that private markets, by definition, deprive investors of standardized disclosures and governance tools you have in public markets, it's incumbent on asset owners like CalSTRS to implement policies that set clear expectations for sustainability, workforce management, and risk mitigation. As you learned today, CalSTRS has expanded private markets to 44% of your portfolio, which can amplify the risks from governance gaps. But the risks can be mitigated through effective policy. It's crucial to set workforce management standards, disclosures of qualitative and quantitative data indicative of operational practices, and enforcement mechanisms. With trillions in assets, the private equity industry now employs over 12 million workers in the US alone across nearly every industry. Unfortunately, private equity's track record on labor practices has too often been one of labor disputes, bankruptcies and layoffs, injuries, and child labor. Our analysis of 11 large private equity managers found in 2023 that companies owned by these firms had paid $1.6 million in health and safety fines and $4.3 million for wage and hour violations in their portfolio companies. These poor practices create legal, financial, and reputational risk for private equity managers and their investors, as CalSTRS knows well. Peer funds like New York State Common and CalPERS have adopted labor principles that include respecting workers' rights, neutrality in organizing efforts, prioritizing health and safety, worker training and retention, fair compensation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Among many examples of private equity's failures, this board engaged around slaughterhouse company Packer Sanitation, to which CalSTRS had direct exposure through Blackstone Core Equity Partners. PSSI was found by the Department of Labor in 2023 to have employed at least 102 children at 13 plants in 8 states in conditions of, quote, oppressive child labor, which the agency said represented a systemic failure across the entire organization. This example had material financial fallout, with PSSI losing major client contracts, multiple downgrades of the company's credit rating, and deteriorating liquidity and a negative outlook per the S&P as of October 2024. By adopting labor principles that guide private markets investments, CalSTRS would give itself the advantage of setting clear expectations for private equity managers. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. That is the conclusion of public comment for item 3.
Thank you. Okay, on to item number 4, CalSTRS Stewardship Priorities Annual Update. Welcome, Aisha, Lynn, and Niall. Oh. Oh, Jonathan's getting it. She can advance for you if you want to start.
Okay, sounds good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aisha Mastagni, and I'm a senior portfolio manager in the Sustainable Investment and Stewardship Strategies unit. And I'm super excited today to provide an update on the stewardship priorities. Some of you may know we've had some changes in leadership within the investment office, and part of my expanded role, we hired Lynn Pequin, who many of you know. She not only brings deep financial expertise, but also extensive policy experience. And right next to me is Niall Gerritsen. He was promoted to a portfolio manager, and he brings over a decade of experience as an energy analyst. So when we meet with companies, I feel like sometimes Niall knows a little bit more about the companies than the people we're meeting with. But so the three of us make up the leadership team of the stewardship group. But we couldn't do what we do without the dedicated and support of the investment officers that do the everyday engagement of our portfolio companies, proxy voting, and all of our advocacy work. So first and foremost, I just wanted to talk about, why do we do stewardship? It's one, to mitigate risk within the portfolio, support long-term value creation, and promote sustainable practices. And this is so important just because we're really trying to support the benefits for the teachers of California, just like we just saw in that video that opened up the meeting. Now, last year, the board approved the stewardship priorities that you see in front of you. If you recall, we set up a 3-year plan because stewardship doesn't happen overnight. A lot of times it takes time, sometimes longer than we would like, but we established these stewardship priorities, and so we're going to go briefly through these because I want to leave enough time to talk about our new engagement activities. But I want to remind the board about the criteria that we use to determine our stewardship priorities. So first and foremost, all of these priorities have relevance and significance to the long-term performance of the fund. Secondly, we have the capacity to influence change based on the tools that we have available as shareholders. And then last but not least, we have the ability to deliver measurable outcomes. And all of these, each one of these stewardship priorities has focus areas underneath them, and we develop engagement plans within the team that really sets out the change we're trying to achieve. And you would see that in the attachment 1 is actually the highlights of last year of the outcomes that we've achieved. And you'll also see that in the quarterly engagement and actions that is published on our website. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Niall and Lynn.
Good morning, everybody. Lynn Paquin, Portfolio Manager with the SIS team. It's great to see you all. And as Aisha spoke a little bit about the priorities and the engagement plans that we put together, this is how we actually get to the nuts and bolts of our work. So we do this once a year, and we lay out the goals, we lay out the strategies, and we put in what our vision of success looks like. And then at the conclusion of the year, we go back to this and we measure how far we've come. And so we use this as a guidepost with our company engagements. And last year, from January 1st through November 30th, we engaged with 478 public companies, and they represented roughly $46.5 billion of combined market value. And on this slide, I wanted to touch on the human capital management disclosure work that we've been doing. So we've been writing to companies, engaging with companies, asking them to disclose their workforce data. Currently, they have to, if you have more than 100 employees, you have to disclose that information to Department of Labor, but you don't need to make it public. And so we and other institutional investors have been asking for this for quite a while. And this is one of those areas where we have seen some good progress, because if you look back in 2020, only 5% of the S&P 500 companies were disclosing this. And now we're up to over 75%. So we're going to keep plugging away and get the other 25% and continue with this work. But I would like to turn it over to Niall to talk a little bit about net zero work that we're doing.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Niall Garrettson, Portfolio Manager. I work closely with Aisha and Lynn. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our 3 main net zero work streams. Starting with Climate Action 100, I'm sure you're all relatively familiar with it, so I'll just make a couple of quick points here. One is that we continue to be involved and lead the engagements on 9 companies, so there's no change there. The second thing is that in all of our work, whether it's engaging through Climate Action 100 or other forums, our first priority has always been the financial interest of our teachers, not anybody else's. We've been consistent about that, so that will not need to change either. The second area is what we call the Priority 45 high emitters. This is simply a list of 45 companies in the public equities portfolio that have high emissions, and they've also been relatively underengaged in the past by us and by other investors. And just to give you some color on how we arrived at this list, we were doing some landscaping analysis a while back of where the emissions come from in the portfolio, the public equities portfolio. And one thing we observed is that there's over 9,000 stocks in there, but 75% of the emissions were coming from just 250 companies. It was extremely top heavy. So we looked at that list and asked ourselves, where should we be focusing our time and energy to have the most positive impact for the teachers? And so we crossed off the companies that Climate Action 100 was already engaging. We crossed off the companies that are in jurisdictions where the normal tools of shareholder engagement just aren't going to be effective for us for whatever reason. We were left with 45 companies. It's a diverse mix of companies from different industries, all at their own different level of maturity in terms of their decarbonization journey. A lot of them are new to us, so we're spending a lot of time developing those relationships, and we're going to keep working through them methodically. The last one's very topic specific. As we did that landscaping analysis, another one of the questions we looked at was, of all the emissions that are happening in the world, which ones are easiest to abate with like existing technologies, can be acted on now, and which ones are also cheap to mitigate, relatively speaking. And that led us to methane emissions from oil and gas operations, which is about 3 to 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And the interesting thing about methane is that it's the one greenhouse gas that's a saleable product. It's basically natural gas. So if you can keep it in the pipe instead of letting it leak into the atmosphere, you can sell it and generate revenue. And the other nice thing about it is that it's very powerful from a heat trapping perspective in the atmosphere, but it doesn't last nearly as long as carbon dioxide. So if we act now, we can have real impact on our lifetimes. So there's over 100 oil and gas producers and pipeline companies that are part of this focused engagement. We're working through them one by one because they each have their own very unique facts and circumstances, portfolios, geographies, and so forth, and nuances. We're leaning heavily on our existing C-suite relationships, building new ones, working with the sell side, using analytics from third parties, doing field research, and so forth. And we've had some nice successes so far with very tangible outcomes. One generalized thing we're asking all these companies to do is to join the United Nations framework on methane emissions, which is basically a framework that attempts to build public trust and the credibility of the reporting of these companies' methane emissions and also their abatement activities. We think over 100 are eligible. So far, 33 portfolio companies have joined, and about 10 of those have joined after direct engagement from us. So I guess one final thought here, in everything we do in these net zero work streams, we're very focused on what is at the nexus of reducing emissions and also creating higher shareholder value for all shareholders, including and especially our teachers. So I'll leave it there and turn it over to back to Lynn.
Thank you, Niall. And so this brings me to the next slide. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically the rollbacks that several large companies have announced over the past year. And as Niall said, all of this work is grounded in sustainability. There's a body of research that shows that diverse workforces, they help companies to attract and retain good employees. They help generate productive gains, and then they also help to limit legal and reputational risk. So when the first company announced that they were rolling back their programs, our staff, led by Reka Vaitla, quickly put together a strategy. And so we sent letters to companies that had announced the rollbacks requesting an engagement meeting. And to date, we've had about 10 of those meetings. And at the same time, we also sent letters to those large public-facing companies that had great DEI programs, urging them to continue, because I think sometimes it's kind of like everything in life. You only hear when bad things are happening. So we do want to give them the support they need to say that our investors do care about this. But then getting back to the companies that announced the rollbacks. So the vast majority of these companies, when we talked to them, said that they were not going to change the programs. They're not dropping the programs. And they're also not going to drop their workforce reporting if they have been doing that already. They are pulling back on sponsoring community events. They're changing their language. Sometimes they're tweaking the program a bit. And we are going to continue to have conversations with them. And then during the spring proxy season, we're going to be looking for evidence that they have not changed the program and continue to report. And then as new companies announce rollbacks, or a couple this week, they get added to our list and we start the process all over again. Should I continue? Okay. So that's been an interesting process, and I'm glad that we had room within our engagement plans to jump on this quickly when it did happen. The other item I wanted to talk about is responsible firearms. Michael Weston continues to lead that work for us, and he meets with retailers on a couple of things. First is the best practices to ensure that firearms are sold legally. And secondly, looking at some of the programs these retailers have put in place to keep their employees, their customers, and their communities safer. And then he also has been continuing to engage with banks and credit card companies and online payment plans just to ensure that they have protections in place to make sure that they're not financing illegally sold firearms. And with that, I'll turn it on to Niall.
You want to? We have a question, so since we're on this topic, let's do that, and then we'll go back to the next topic, if that's okay.
Just for clarification, so McDonald's obviously was on this news this morning, and they said in the report that they plan to continue. So I guess I'm just a little confused what that means if they're rolling back, but they plan to continue. Is it kind of like, we're going to keep doing it, but not telling anybody? It feels like, right?
That's a lot of the tenor of the conversation. So they're talking about changing their language. I think all of this is coming down to how they talk about things. I think that they recognize there has been benefits to their workforce and their productivity. So they don't want to end it completely, but they're not going to be as public facing in many cases, sponsoring certain community events. But they will continue to offer the training, the inclusion programs, diversity programs to their workforce, and then they will continue to report on that.
Okay, thank you.
One more, Lynn. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, do we take into account the size of our investments when we make decisions about who we're going to engage with?
We typically do, because we do want to make sure that we use our resources wisely, but these companies that have been announcing are large companies, and they're very important in the retail sector. So we have been trying to engage with all of them that have announced.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll give you just a few bullets on one of our newest stewardship focus areas, which is artificial intelligence. This is really, it's a new one, but it's an overlay, and it encompasses really all the companies we've been talking to in these other work streams, as we've been finding out. I guess, like you, of course, we've been reading about the rise of artificial intelligence in the news over the last couple of years, and we've begun to observe multiple layers of impacts on the CalSTRS portfolio. I guess most obviously, the positive share price performance of the hyperscalers in the public equities portfolio. But as a tail onto that, there's going to be significantly rising electricity demand that has emissions impacts, also impacts to water scarcity, communities. There's also a rising opportunity set for investments by our private markets colleagues. So there's just multiple layers. In addition, there's hundreds and hundreds of companies in the public equities portfolio that can potentially want to benefit from these tools by deploying them to make themselves more efficient, but that also entails potential risks. So what we are doing right now is we are very much in learning and listening mode. Starting with the companies we're already talking to about, even methane, believe it or not. We're working artificial intelligence into these conversations to learn really what is the state of the art here. And then we're actually broadening it to engage with other industries where previously we have not been very active. So for example, Lynn and I next week are going to JP Morgan's healthcare conference in San Francisco to meet with drug makers about how they're trying to deploy these tools to make more effective medicines faster, and then what the risks are. Ultimately, it's a big project. It's being spearheaded by our investment officers, Rekha Vetla and Rajveer Danoa. What we hope to get to is a place where we understand what real standards should be for our portfolio companies, depending on whether they're developers of these tools or deployers, and then what our expectations should be. So stay tuned.
And then another newer engagement plan that we've launched this year is biodiversity in nature. So this is not a new topic for CalSTRS. We've engaged on these topics before with a lot of different companies. But once again, we have a team that took on researching different engagement opportunities and learning more. And so although we're still in a learning mode, and this team was led by Elena Drakes and supported by Rajveer Danoa and Rekha Vetla, looking at 5 different engagement opportunities, they decided to join Nature Action 100 this past September. And so this is a global investor-led collaborative engagement. And there's a list of 100 different companies that will be engaged with by different teams. And what's interesting about this is that these companies are very significant in the broader economy. They're all very large companies. They range from a lot of different sectors. And so at this point, we decided to join engagements with 4 companies in the food and beverage sector. And we thought that by keeping it in the same grouping, it would help to us to ensure comparability across the different engagement teams as we build our knowledge, and also help us to share relevant learnings when we engage on biodiversity with companies outside of Nature Action. So the Nature Action group did put together a benchmark. They released it during the Biodiversity COP in November, and they went through and they evaluated all 100 companies. And what we liked about this is that there's a clear pathway. So initially they want to see if a company has expressed any ambitions in this area, and then have they set targets, have they done an assessment, what does their governance look like, and finally, how are they monitoring this going forward? And so far, the engagements have been very great. The companies welcome this. I mean, they're frankly trying to get their arms around the issues as well, too, going forward. So the vast majority of the companies have already expressed an ambition in this area. There's still a lot of progress to go as far as doing target assessments and looking at some of the different issues. But as Niall said about the last item, this is going to be a very important year for us to really increase our learning and start to apply it across the broader companies that we engage with. And so we're looking forward to updating you on the outcomes this time next year. And I'll turn it back to Aisha.
Yep. And then I'm just going to quickly talk about protecting shareholder rights and the gains. We wanted to add this here because we want to ensure that we have capacity to engage on any challenges we might face in the upcoming years. Obviously, we can't predict what might happen, but we've been through a SEC where it was controlled mostly by Republicans. And so we want to make sure that we're prepared, but that we also remain flexible. And I think a good example of that is, we're unlikely to see a climate rule disclosure from the SEC anytime soon. And so we've always supported the International Sustainability Standards Board, but we're going to pivot and double down because they are making strides and getting various regulators around the world to adopt the ISSP standards. And so we're going to be focused on that. The other thing is in terms of shareholder rights. I think this is a good example where we'll likely leverage some of our partners like the Council of Institutional Investors. Some of you may not know, but I'm currently the chair of CII, and it's an organization that advocates for effective corporate governance, strong shareholder rights, and reasonable financial regulations. And so over their 40-year history, they actually are having an anniversary at the spring conference. Encourage you all to go. But they've been able to navigate different political environments. And it really is a big tent organization that includes both blue and red state pension funds. It includes union funds and corporate employee benefit plans. And so that's just an example where we would lean in and really utilize and leverage partners like CII. And then last but not least, we talked about the DEI rollbacks. It's really about having a dialogue with both the leaders and the laggers. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Mr. Ruffino.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you for the presentation. And quick question on this last point that you mentioned, Aisha, the climate action and net zero transition, right? So you mentioned the challenges. Obviously, we're not going to get a rule, but given that also there's legal challenges to the SEC disclosure rule, do we have a contingency measures, or is there anything in place to ensure consistent reporting from portfolio companies?
Yeah, so I think that's one, Frank, and I'll let Niall chime in here because he has a lot of the dialogue with companies. We're fortunate, even as we've gone back to talk to companies, they recognize this as a risk And so companies are still trying to make their companies more resilient as the world transitions. So that's the good news. The bad news is we're unlikely to see a uniformed rule, which is why we've been very, very supportive of the International Sustainability Standards Board, because remember, we're a global investor. And so that's really about setting that global baseline of disclosures is the most important. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, maybe the one thing I would add is, especially the biggest companies have a very diverse set of global stakeholders, and that's not changing. The other thing is that, when we read sustainability reports, just like we read annual reports, there are KPIs in there that are very relevant. There are others that are less relevant. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see some changes for the KPIs that are less relevant, but for the things that really get cut to the heart of the matter for a company's performance, I would expect those to stay. And if they don't, I think it's unlikely they would change, but if they do, we'll be raising it.
Can I come back, one other question, Madam Chair, to Mr. Garrison? You mentioned about the cross-cutting engagement, obviously the AI, the artificial intelligence. Can I ask you real quickly, how do we ensure that these portfolio companies that are developing these AI solutions are prioritizing workforce upskilling and mitigating job displacement?
Good answer for that. We're still getting calibrated on what best practices look like. I guess, I don't know.
I can jump in.
I'll just make one point real quick. With respect to financial services and also healthcare so far, I think, and insurance as well, we've seen a real reluctance by those industries to let tools make decisions. It's really been about more helping their employees work smarter and more effectively. I don't know that we've seen people chomping at the bit to, frankly, fire employees.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, it is early days for the companies too, outside of the tech sector. A lot of companies are grappling with how they're going to roll this out. They're starting with, like the chatbots and OpenAI, that kind of stuff. But they are focused on making sure that they have the right governance at the board level, the right education at the board level. They are providing training to those employees. And I think out of all the companies we talked to, there was only one that alluded to they're going to have to potentially reduce workforce, but that's years down the road. But this is a conversation, a question that we do ask with all of our engagements as they start to roll this out.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
And one last final congratulations, Mr. Garrison, on your promotion.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Madam President.
You're welcome, Frank. Anyone else? Go ahead, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve McCourt with Makita. We've highlighted this many times in the past, but I think it warrants highlighting again that from our vantage point, CalSTRS has had for many years a market-leading effort in this area of engagement, and one that's been rooted in strong fundamental research and with a primary eye on risk mitigation for the investment portfolio. So we continue to see those attributes across these efforts, and we wanted to highlight that for the record.
Thank you. Ellen, anything? Good? Okay. Seeing no one else on the board with questions, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yay for team.
Are there any public comments on item number 4?
There are no members of the public for item 4.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 5, Investment Committee Work Plan on Private Market Priorities. Mr. Chan.
All right.
Jacobson, Mr. Dury, here we go.
Good morning again, members of the Investment Committee. I'm going to kick this off, and I just want to level set and give you the purpose of this item is to give you our recommendation for the goals of this private markets work plan and a framework around how we are going to try to establish the priorities and develop or further develop holistic oversight of our private market assets. And so number one, we're asking for your feedback because it's an informational item. And number two, guidance on how to move forward, and specifically just a nod of approval, and Kirsty will get into more of the follow-ups regarding that, but I just wanted to give you a landscape of the item. I think it was a perfect segue that we had our public markets team come up, and you just heard our stewardship priorities and how we engage public corporations. As Steve McCourt said, we are leaders in corporate governance and have pioneered many areas: board diversity, human capital management, the energy transition, and I'm sure we're delving into AI and will become leaders there as well. That's the public markets where we directly own the securities in those corporations. There's greater public transparency in information. There's a well-defined regulatory regime. We can vote our proxies to influence, for example. And could we turn to the next slide, please? And so, but if we looked at the largest trends in the portfolio over the last couple of decades, the obvious one of the largest shifts in our allocations has been to diversify our portfolio more into the private market assets as well as the alternative assets. And you can see that we've moved from roughly 9% in 2000 to roughly 44% of the total fund in recent tracking. So as we think about, the private markets are just like the public markets, right? They share many of the same issues, right? No corporation is going to be absolutely perfect. There's going to be some issues, generally speaking. Well, there are maybe a few close to perfect corporations, but we don't tend to see that in public markets or private markets, right? So there are unique opportunities and challenges in the private markets, just like there are in the public markets, right? So the opportunities we're discussing, diversifying our portfolio, greater absolute returns, which we've experienced over time, a greater amount of alpha or outperformance versus our benchmarks, the ability to leverage our partners through cloud model structures. But then there are unique challenges. It's a less regulated space, as we know. There's less transparency publicly, but you could argue there's could be more transparency for larger investors like CalSTRS as we engage our partners. But in many cases, as opposed to the public markets, we don't own directly the underlying asset. We hold it through our partners. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is engage our partners and hold our partners and managers accountable. And that's how we are mitigating risks around selecting the best managers, doing the due diligence around that and the framework, aligning our interests with them through collaborative model type structures where we have more potential control in ownership or joint ventures, et cetera. And ultimately, holding them accountable through these mechanisms. Today, we're recommending a work plan, and it'll traverse this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. We want to develop priorities and ensure holistic oversight of our assets. So number one, we want to match these unique risks and characteristics to this appropriate level of oversight. And number two, because our asset allocation obviously has shifted more and more into private market assets, it's become something that we want timely for us to really take a holistic lens and review. So if we enter a work plan over the next couple of years, and we're all aligned around how we've developed and further developed our holistic oversight and feel great about how we can manage and mitigate these risks as well as capture the upside to the portfolio, I think we've really achieved our goal. And Mike is going to talk more about our goals specifically on the next slide.
So as Scott pointed out, directed the fourth goal there, it really is to ensure, It is to ensure that the investment committee has a holistic oversight across the private asset classes. And we also include the public asset classes because as we research this, we felt that there was, something for us to learn about the structures that have been put in place, what's worked and what hasn't worked in both the private asset classes, what we've done in the past, and in the public asset classes. So that's why we're taking that holistic view. Although this is focused on the private asset classes, we think that we can gain from looking at both at the same time. If we were to achieve this, essentially we're going to strengthen the governance of the private market investing at CalSTRS, not just at the staff level of the way we review things, but also at the board level of how you have the oversight and how you can increase your level of oversight and be more comfortable with the oversight of the private markets. And to do that, we're going to create a kind of more efficient information and workflow processes. And we'll include not just the staff, the investment staff, but it would also take into account having our consultants, meaning your consultants who are independent, and having them be available and part of the process for both the communication and some of the oversight responsibilities. And through all this, we anticipate that not only will we maintain, but we can enhance CalSTRS' position in the marketplace. Obviously, that would be an ongoing goal, and we think that if we do this right and do it thoughtfully, we can maintain and do that. There are a lot of specifics. These goals are very broad, but they have some specific underlying goals, and there's some specific ways we're going to get there. And for that, I'll turn it over to Kirsty.
Great. Hello, Kirsty Jenkinson, the Director of Sustainable Investment and Stewardship Strategies. Just to sort of dive in a little bit, you'll have seen this in the item that we wrote up for you, so I won't spend too long on it and happy to answer any questions. But we thought the easiest way to tackle this work plan was to break it down into sort of 4 very clear components. Education, investment beliefs, practices, roles and responsibilities and processes. I'll just take a little minute of what we hope to do in each of these over the next couple of years as Scott laid out. If we think about education, we think when we look at the private market investments, it's going to be useful for us all, given that there's a number of new staff, there's a lot of new board members as well, just to really establish a common knowledge base on private market investing. There's a lot of terminology, processes, diligence processes, structures, engagement with partners, peer practices, legal nuances, understanding of risks and return profiles, and also stakeholder interests that we think it's going to be really important that we all sort of level set on what do we all mean when we're talking about private market investments, what does it look like, how do we invest? And so we'd like to spend a little bit of time with the board going through a sort of a pretty dedicated engagement and education plan. We'd love to use that with staff. We'll brief you. We hope to bring in our consultants, as your consultants, I'm so sorry, as well, to help. They've also very graciously said that they'd love to be part of this sort of education process to kind of be clear on what our goals and how we invest in the private markets. And we can bring in external organizations as well. So that's a little bit around the why, the what, and the how we hope that the education plan will sort of evolve over the next months. I think it will also involve a look at our current investment beliefs and policies. You'll recognize we have 9 investment beliefs. That is obviously the sort of the highest arching framework that we use for kind of setting alignment between staff, between the board and everything around our goals. We think it will merit considering whether there is avenues for another investment belief or whether there are additional policies that we need to review as we think about this work plan. We laid out in the board item some of the policies that we can be looking at and reviewing, because ultimately we want to be clear and see, is there anything we need to simplify? Is there anything we need to enhance? Anything that we need to refine to achieve the goals of the work plan? So that will be a sort of a look at the beliefs, policies, guidelines will be another part of our components. I think roles and responsibilities, when you think about having a good work plan, it's always good to know who's doing what, where, when, and is there complete clarity around that? I think the same applies to private market investing, obviously. Are we really clear of the role and responsibilities of the investment committee, your consultants, us as staff, our legal staff, and our public affairs staff who help obviously communicate to the outside world and to our stakeholders? We'd like to go through a process of just being, discussing with you, are we clear around roles and responsibilities, and does anything need to shift and be heightened there? Ultimately, the goal, obviously, is to provide you and staff and our stakeholders as well with clear kind of understanding of how we manage this large part of our portfolio. And then the fourth part of the work plan, we think, is the proverbial processes as well. Processes need to be working smoothly. We hope that you will have comfort as well that there is a clear plan for receiving input from external stakeholders where needed, but also an ability to sort of work with staff and have a good, clear communication loop between us and you and between the outside world on how we manage a lot of these issues. We like to think about the idea of sort of, we listen, we respond, we act, we report, we reflect as a kind of a sort of a process for thinking about this that we'd like to come back to you on as well. That's really the sort of the four components. As we said in the item, we haven't explicitly laid out a timeline yet. We wanted first to get your input and feedback on this approach. But obviously, if we can get to a point at the end of today with sort of comfort that we're moving in the right direction, we'll come back to you with some very clear sort of next steps and with a time frame that we lay out what this could look like in the different components over the weeks and months ahead. So grateful to hear your feedback, and then we'll get to work.
Thank you, Kirsty. Just for the board, this is not an action item. However, it is time to take action if you see something that needs to be added or have questions about what was just laid out and what is in the item printed materials. So we do have a few questions for you. Ms. Gallegos.
Yes, make sure you can hear me. So you've mentioned roles and responsibilities and processes. How are you coordinating with the sustainability group in terms of who's doing what, making sure everybody's informed, making sure that we're going out with one voice to the community so that they don't get frustrated with us if they're engaging with multiple people?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Obviously, given my role in leading our sustainable investment team, I act as it's been a kind of discussion between Scott, Mike, and myself around sustainable investment, around our private markets, and obviously leadership to sort of think about the governance structure that we have here in our private market asset classes. And then clearly my team interacts a lot with our public affairs colleagues. And so I think there's a nice way in which, again, we have close relationships with our legal team, thank you, Brian, and close relationships with Teresa. So I think with all of us in the mix, we've set it up in a way to ensure that we can hopefully, make sure all that works really smoothly.
Great, good to hear.
I would just add one thing. We're already doing this. We've been doing it for a number of years in the reporting of what we're doing on the sustainability throughout the private asset classes. So those meetings have been happening already this year. We've had a couple of meetings this year with some of the private asset classes and the team. So this is already ongoing.
Great.
Yeah, one thing that I think is important to make clear as well, Deborah, is that this is really a joint effort. So it's led by the private markets underneath Mike, but also CIS as well, right? So it's not just a sustainable unit doing it, but it's essentially you really need all of those parties, a joint effort in moving this forward in the right way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Karen.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Denise. Thanks, Kirsty and group. I really got excited about the education part of it because it's just like we can't know enough and we can't know more all the time because as I've always said, you do it 24/7. We are here to get information from you and try to do the best that we can and try to be our fiduciary person. But I really like the education part of it, and I guess, what do you envision, or how is it going to work? When are you going to be doing it? Will it be in separate sessions during the board meetings? And then also, on the second part, the investment beliefs, when you look at them, I just assumed that they were for private and public and everything combined. But then now it doesn't seem that way. And so if you're suggesting that we maybe add another belief that's focused on the privates, then that kind of confuses me as to the prior or the previous investment beliefs and how they're directed.
Yeah, you want me to take? Yeah, I'll go ahead and maybe take a crack at the investment beliefs question.
Okay.
I very much believe that our beliefs are an evolution over time, and it does include private markets. It does apply to them. Mm-hmm. But as we think about the unique opportunities and challenges, and as we've been thinking through this work plan, I think there's going to be space for us to make some elements even more specific.
Okay.
And that will add further guidance and clarity. And that's one of the greater mechanisms, I think, for you as investment committee members to guide staff, and then it guides our policies. And we'll get more specific through those policies because they differ depending on the private market asset class as well. So that's how they work in tandem.
Okay, and then we do want to make it broad enough so that it can encompass a lot of the things that you're working on.
Yes, absolutely.
And on your first point, Karen, actually I'm slightly scared now that we're talking about education amongst our current community. It's sort of no pressure of doing a good education program. I'm suddenly feeling really nervous. But I think what we would hope to do is use parts of the board meetings in the, we've deliberately tried to make this over the next couple of sort of seasons, board seasons.
Okay.
So we don't rush it. We think there's a lot of topics to cover. We'd love to carve out time in these investment committees to have a little bit of a session in each, in both closed and open session. And I think we can be creative about other mechanisms that we use to kind of communicate with you and provide some of that input. So let us come back to you with a suggestion in more detail and run it by you as to how that's going to work best. But hopefully we can make it exciting and as exciting as everybody is used to doing in classrooms here.
Yikes. And then I know that the investment staff does offer special deeper diving into different subject areas and things like that. So we as board members can take it upon ourselves to contact you if those sessions are requested or
yes,
however we want to do that, right?
Yes.
We can still do that. We can still do that. And just to make sure that all the other board members are aware of that, just we can always request that.
That's been really a fantastic addition. I think you and Ken pioneered it, but we've hosted many investment community members, and I think they've all walked away with a greater set of knowledge and a better imprint. So that's a yes with an exclamation point. We'd love to do that.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Boras.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Given the multitude of various asset classes within private investments, I'm curious whether any of them may differ or be one-offs from the rest, and then whether it makes it more difficult to apply a standard practice, as you suggested here, to that particular class versus the others.
Well, it's going to be different for each asset class. And what comes into play is what the investments are holding and what our rights and responsibilities and the structure of the collaborative model structures we have. For instance, if we're doing debt investments, we have a lot less rights, and legally we cannot make a lot of suggestions if we have debt investments in place. Private equity is significantly different than real estate. The infrastructure program is different than the two of those, and now we have also the CIS program. But there's enough commonalities of the way that we have the structures that we can lay out the program through the investment beliefs and how we can communicate, what we're doing, how we're doing it within the rights that we have. So each asset class might have some things that are different in how they would approach their partners and how we would communicate. But overall, we're not concerned that we can't, put a broad program in place that can give the board what they need from that standpoint. And in addition, even the structure we already have in place with respect to the board consultant, although private equity and real estate get the most noise in some of these issues, you have individual consultants with Makita and RFA that can address some of those issues. And then broadly, you also can look at the overall program. So I believe we have the structure in place to address those.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Gunning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's in processes, but the one thing I'm not seeing is communication. I mean, this year we had the hotels, the meat packing, everyone coming in here questioning. So it feels like we need to have a way to talk about how we do this, that there's a method to the madness, and really appreciate this, because we're going to use this all year. But some way to vocalize our approach would be the only thing I'd add in the 4 categories, Scott.
Great, thank you. That's great feedback. Let's we'll take it back and absorb it and try to think about how we might incorporate that. But you've seen us evolving and expanding some of this. We added the ad hoc closed session for strategy in some elements, but I think this is an expanded topic like you suggested. So we'll take it back and
building upon that, Bill was really good at stating in public, asking Chris to follow up, and so something along those lines, so the public is aware that we see it, we have a process, we implement it, that sort of.
Yeah, the process I think is very important for us to be efficient in doing it, so that's a great suggestion.
Good stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Good job. I like that. Okay, I see no further questions from the dais. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing and learning so much more about this.
Me too.
Thank you. That was good.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments on item number 5?
There are public comments on item number 5. We will take the caller on the phone first.
Great, thank you.
Okay, our caller is Doug. Doug, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Doug Orr, and I'm the chair of the CFT Retirement Policy Committee. And I want to thank the CalSTRS staff and the investment committee members for taking up the task of developing this detailed set of principles to guide your allocation of funds in private equity. The presentation and discussion just now is very encouraging. In private equity markets, as a shareholder, you have the option of both voice and exit. Your part ownership of a company allows you to engage with the leadership of the company to move it in a direction that is more consistent with the long-term financial interests of CalSTRS as an organization and its 1 million plus members and beneficiaries. As the previous item noted, you are using your voice very effectively. If a company continues to move in a direction that is antagonistic to our long-term financial interests, you also have the ability to exit the relationship by selling your shares. With respect to private equity, ensuring there is an alignment of interest between CalSTRS and the general partners to whom you allocate money is critically important. Once money is allocated, in the short and medium term, you have a limited voice and a limited ability to exit. Limited partners have very little influence over how the money they have allocated to a general partner is used. If, for example, the general partner engages in activities that do not align with the interests of CalSTRS and its members, there's a limited amount that the limited partner can do to change the direction of the general partner. It's also very difficult and time-consuming to exit from a limited partnership agreement. Given this difference, having a very clear set of principles that guide all private equity allocations is critically important. This set of principles must address all of the ESG criteria that CalSTRS has developed with respect to public equity. And given the number of times that stakeholders have come to the investment committee to raise workforce management issues, including 2 earlier today, these principles need to be included in the language. The principles on private equity need to include language to address workforce management issues. This is a particular problem in some private equity with some private equity managers. As a member and a retiree, I look forward to CalSTRS having a policy in place to manage these serious long-term financial risks in private equity. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next speaker will be in person. Dawn, go ahead.
Good morning, Don Stauffer from CTA NA Retired. And I think I'm building off of Mr. Warris's question a little bit earlier. So I've noticed that a new investment class, private debt, is also showing up in the CalSTRS investments. For instance, Blue Owl, which is a private debt company, but I've noticed is listed under public equities. And I'm wondering if this should have some additional considerations like other classes of private investments, and if it also should be pulled out into its own investment category. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. That is the conclusion of public comments for item 5.
Okay, thank you. So we have a break scheduled before item number 6. It's 11:05. So how about if we come back at 11:20? 15 minutes. We'll try and start on time, my friends. Welcome back to the investment committee. We are live, my friends in the audience. Sorry, I don't have a gavel. I don't know where it went. We are back to item number 6, our Chief Investment Officer's report.
All right, I guess let's see if we can spool up the presentation. This CIO report I'm going to break up into two sections. I'm going to spend a bit more time on the markets and our positioning, just because we've ended the calendar year and we're heading into 2025. And then the second section, I'll get into our long-term themes and discuss them. So I'll break in between the two and take questions. But let me just lead off, and maybe we'll move to the first slide. If you looked at the first half of the year, the NAV, oh yeah, maybe, could I? Thanks, Ellen. So if you looked at the end of November, our net asset value totaled $352.5 billion. And that lighter shade of the blue line is where we ended the last fiscal year at $341 billion. So we added roughly a bit over $11 billion in value, although that's gone down a little bit because December was a turbulent month in the markets. So we had a solid start to the fiscal year, but I want to flip forward here to, yeah, please do, Alan.
I almost never comment on this section, but it's important to remember those numbers are net numbers. And a huge amount of money goes out every single month on your payroll. So that is a net number, and it's very important to keep that in mind.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Alan. I think that this chart looks like something you've probably seen already this year, but if you roll back to the beginning of 2023, like we're rolling forward to the beginning of 2025 now, this chart wasn't expected in 2024, meaning that as we began the year, a lot of market strategists were mixed on what was going to happen. And the surprise was that, well, the economy was stronger than expected, and it still remains robust today. And so, in fact, if you think about the robustness of the economy, it's a lot stronger than you would expect coming out of a period where the Fed had raised rates more than 500 basis points. And yes, in the margin, we're seeing some slowing with the economy. However, it doesn't appear that necessarily we're heading into an imminent recession. That being said, there are always uncertainty and triggers that could get us there. And that's a big but, because I think that as we go through this presentation, you'll understand that there is a lot of potential triggers out there that could, and I think probably will, lead to a normal correction this year as we think about the markets. Maybe not the economy, but the markets, that is. So hidden behind the scenes of this innocent upward sloping chart are lurking a number of risks. One is concentration risk. So you've heard and know that the top 7 stocks are, depending on the index, 30 or 40%. They've been driving the upward movement of the markets. That's not a healthy market. And essentially also it speaks to being less and less diversified as this top 7 just keeps gaining. The other thing that you should note is the blue line is the U.S. market, and the red line is the world, the MSCI ACWI ex the U.S., and you can see a solid outperformance by U.S. markets. This chart probably you could replay in some dimension year after year for the last couple of decades. In fact, the U.S. market is now so far ahead of other global markets. The premium that we have is very, very high in terms of our market valuations. And so those are two areas that I think are underlying the risk of this chart. The other one I would say is valuations. And so as the markets have been fairly robust over the last couple of years, valuations have also crept up. And so you could say that how much of the stronger economy is already priced into stocks. And so what we're going to need to see and continue to see is robust earnings driving this forward. Or if we don't, I think what we could see is a retraction of that market multiple because it is at very high levels, and that remains a risk. I think even more worrisome is as we start this year, as opposed to last year. I said we started last year with a mixed view, with strategists thinking we don't know what's going to go on, and yet the market moved up. And the year before that, in 2023, people thought there would be a recession after such high movements in interest rates. And of course, the market moved up during this year. This year, we have an absolute consensus around the markets going up after 2 very, very strong years. And so we're starting, I think, from an expectations perspective, too, on the wrong footing. So I think that there are a lot of risks here lurking, even though we've seen a couple of years of significant stock market gains, particularly in the U.S. markets that have driven returns. So let me just flip forward to some of the key themes that I and the investment team are seeing and thinking about in 2025. One is inflation and the Fed. So you saw in the last Fed meeting, they really came out hawkish, and so you had all these potential interest rate cuts that got withdrawn, and the market is now expecting a lot less, maybe 2 going forward. But I think the important point to draw here is the risks are a lot more balanced around whether we're going to see further inflation or even deflation. And I think that's going to create a lot of uncertainty as we get economic data that is both positive and negative around these circumstances. And so I think we're likely to see a repeat of what we saw in the last year, which is a roller coaster. If you looked at the 10-year yield, and that volatility could be good and bad, depending on whether you're positioned to take advantage of opportunities. The other, I think, big uncertainty out there are the policy changes, and we've discussed this before, that a lot of what was talked about, the rhetoric on the campaign trail, could be inflationary: fiscal spending, tariffs, immigration restrictions, to name a few. And we're just very uncertain how much of that is going to make its way into policy. But I suspect in the first half of this year, there's going to be a lot of potential for surprises on both sides of it. And the market hates uncertainty, so I think this is going to create some triggers around volatility as well. The last one, AI and the potential of AI has certainly been driving the markets. And so the question I think you pose is has that gotten ahead of itself? Because eventually we're going to need to see that in revenue and earnings, all this large amount of spending and use cases. And so I think that, that remains something that's uncertain and a great risk. And finally, on a geopolitical spectrum, there's still several issues of wars. And if you looked at the developed nations, I feel like every week or month I'm seeing another resignation in a developed nation, which we haven't seen, right? So this deterioration of governance globally is something that never gets priced in the market until it gets priced in the market and you see the risk. So I think many of these areas here are not probably appropriately priced into stocks. So that just leads me to, going back. I'll go back to slide 2. Is to sum it up, we have mixed signals, right? Which is, number one, we have an economy that remains robust, the potential to translate that into increased earnings and an upward market trajectory, but a whole host of risks and uncertainty that is also defining the landscape. And so how do we position the portfolio today? As you can see in the asset mix, we maintain our diversification and allocation near home base. If you looked at the ranges, the blue dots are where we are. And that's how we ended the year in thinking this. And throughout the year, I think leading up over the last 12 months, you've heard us talk about bringing some of the diversifying assets like fixed income back into target. And so if you think about, as I've dialogued with the team and thought about this year, we're likely to lean into both offense and defense. And so if we lean into defense, we're bringing back our diversifying assets to target, because of the inherent risk. But then we're seeing opportunities, particularly in some of the private market assets, where we can produce some alpha or exceed our benchmarks in areas like the energy transition, pockets of private credit that are still structurally growing. After a few years of decline in real estate, we're underweight that. And so there could be a looming inflection point, although we're not calling that yet. We're watchful. And then private equity is seeing more deal flow as well. And so this is a year where we're likely going to need to be a bit on both ends of that, both offense and defense. I do think that the market, one of the punchlines is the market will be volatile. And I expect that in many years you see enormous corrections in markets down 10 or 20%. I think we are going to, see that. And so this could be the year that all of the work we did before in policy and widening the asset allocation bands, increasing the liquidity tools, and developing that flexibility, this might be the year that we do use that and have that flexibility and the tools to take advantage of hopefully in a market environment that is volatile, meaning that it becomes dislocated, assets fall, and we're able to provide liquidity and be able to take advantage of that in our investments. And so I'll pause here. Just I thought I'd spend a little bit more time because we're beginning the year on a look back at what happened as well as some of the risks and themes on the horizon.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, I'm just curious with what you just said, which is that you're expecting possibly a volatile year. How does that drive sort of what we do in the next, say, 6 to 12 months in terms of our investment approach? Does it change at all what we're likely to do, or are you going to hold the course and see what happens?
I think it changes on the margin. And, we ended the year, as I was stating, pretty much close to home and diversified. We also have throughout the year been raising levels of cash. So I think keeping some dry powder available as we look at our total liquidity. And then again, I think we're going to play a little bit of offense and defense, meaning that if we have an underweight, a slight underweight today in our diversifying assets, which would be risk mitigating strategies, fixed income and cash, that we bring that back to target, but at the same time, allocate some capital to these opportunities that we're seeing. So it's a bit of a balanced approach, a barbell approach, if you will, as we think about the allocation to 2025.
In that volatile market, how does that affect, say, our debt, the debt instruments we might choose to engage in?
I think I think that's a question that can be complex. As we underwrite our investments in debt, first of all, we think there will be a default cycle, whether it be credit or private credit. So we're factoring that into the valuations as we do it. Right now, in areas like private credit, there's certain areas where we believe that you're going to get more than paid, even in a default cycle that we go into. So we have to be thoughtful about that. But in a normal year, I think what we'll see is is kind of a quick decline in markets with a resumption, unless we hit a true recession or crisis, right? So if we hit a true recession and crisis, I think there will be a subsequent default cycle of which, it's going to rely upon our current underwriting of those areas and how we've assessed it. But they will be affected. If it's one of those rough patches that's just throughout 2025 where it goes down and then resumes its upward path, then I think there probably won't be much changes within the default cycle of either public or private credits, even though the prices could fluctuate, and that might provide an opportunity for us to invest even more in some of these areas, depending on the prices.
And I assume you and your staff are keeping an eye on the impact of proposed tariffs, so that to the extent that that starts to have an impact, you see it either on the economy or trade, that you're going to take note of that and possibly make adjustments for that.
Oh, yeah. That's and I think this is part of the uncertainty of why it's going to be very important for us to keep dry powder in terms of our total liquidity, keep a diversified portfolio, and be ready to take advantage of opportunities. Because if, for example, there's an expansion of tariffs, I think there'll be an automatic assumption of an inflationary pressure that could really work its way into interest rates in the economy and stock prices, private market prices. So it's one of those areas, again, where we got to play some offense, some defense, keep dry powder, And the good news is we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years in developing flexibility around our tools. We haven't used that flexibility. We've done the opposite of that.
Sure.
And I think that this could actually be the year where we do that.
Yeah. I think you can remove the conditional statement, the if, because I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Well, I've deferred this for multiple sessions, but I did want to spend some time in the second half of the CIO report talking about the mega themes and opportunities, right? So we could see changes in the political landscape, but when we're talking about some of the longer term themes, and this is what I'd like to do is in the CIO report is focus on the long term, because that's where we're going to make our returns. That's where we need to mitigate the risks. And I'm introducing the topic of mega themes because, frankly, I'm seeing in my investing career, I've been seeing so many of these mega themes stacked on top of each other. And I would define it, simply as an opportunity set and a risk that goes across geographies. It goes across our asset classes, across sectors, and most companies are affected. So it's systemic, right? It's one of the biggest risks that we're going to be seeing, but it's also defined as a huge opportunity. If you looked at the total available market over time, it would be defined as trillions of dollars, right? And so as a very substantial large allocator, we need to be focused on both of those elements. And so here I'm just introducing three of them to give you an idea of what they are, but it's also related to how we are building a shared vision together. Because as we think about how the opportunity set is changing, we have to think about how we need to be evolving as an organization as well, whether that be staffing or approach, the structure, or how we are approaching this opportunity set. And so one of the items that I think is very interesting as we think about this particular set of three mega themes is that they share one thing in common, which is that the pace of change is a lot of the risks that we're managing, right? So if we think about a private credit and the shift of lending away from banks, this dynamic is generally speaking a good thing, because in every crisis you've seen in the US, call it 800 banks, 1,000 banks go out of business. You saw this a couple of years ago with Silicon Valley Bank, right? Their assets don't match their liabilities. And so when depositors take their money out, they can't support the investments that they've made that are longer in duration. And so this is moving off the bank balance sheets and probably is a generational opportunity, in terms of the amount and magnitude that's moving out. And with the size, depending on the sub-segment, because as we define private credit, there's a lot of different sub-segments. Some of that supply coming out exceeds the demand. And so you get these circumstances where you have structural premiums. Not all the areas, some of them have also become cyclical at this point. But that's an opportunity set in the timing. If you think about the stability of the financial systems, would you rather have this at a 15 times levered bank, or would you rather have it in the hands of for example, a pension fund that could match that duration and has a stable base of capital? So you don't see the regulators needing then to bail out 800 or 1,000 banks. And so that's one element. So the other, moving to the next mega theme of net zero and the energy transition, this is again, the pace of change is we need to move the world to net zero in a time frame of 2050 and 50% by 2030. We are so well behind that time frame, depending on how you're looking at the world. The amount of investment that's moving in is not nearly enough, right? And so this is an area where, again, the pace of change, the timing of it is too slow, creating greater risks for us as well as the world. We also run the risk of being, if we're too ahead of it, and it's not making its way into the prices, that, if you're 1 or 2 years ahead, you're wrong. And again, that becomes a difficult timing issue. But again, the opportunity set is huge if the world to reach this goal needs to spend over $100 trillion. It's certainly one of the biggest opportunities we'll see. And the same could be said about the digitization of the economy and the AI revolution. You might say, well, the pace of change here is too quick, right? So it's going in front of regulators, it's going in front of how we might see a just transition with workers. And there's a lot of questions that we just talked about in the stewardship item. But again, a massive opportunity. And I introduced these themes just to say now that all of these three themes in their own are very significant risks and opportunities, but now there's an interplay amongst all of them that is colliding in the energy transition and power. And if you think about how on an AI basis, the hyperscalers are now trying to fund, you probably saw the headline that Microsoft was intending to spend $80 billion. I think that was a headline number. They need to build out the data center. And so for us, that includes multiple of our asset classes, whether it be infrastructure or real estate. They need to then, build out the power, which, for us could traverse private equity, infrastructure, our sustainable division. They're doing it in this new form of private credit, trying to take it off their balance sheet, providing a lease back. And so what I'm saying is that in many of these areas now, while we've done extremely well in developing dynamic decision-making and producing excess returns at a divisional level, we need to now coordinate that amongst all the different groups to capture these opportunities, but also mitigate the risks. And this has dynamics where, for us, how should we organize the team? How should we organize and structure everything from that to our incentives? And how do we capture the opportunities on a better footing? So I just wanted to draw that out to give you a sense of how the opportunity sets are changing, how our partnerships are changing, how we're beginning to collaborate more and more as a team. And you'll hear a little bit more about this in some of the education around the Total Fund Management Division, which I formed to try to facilitate some of these dynamics as well. But I'll pause there because I'm thinking there could be some questions.
Ms. Gallegos.
Just another risk that sort of comes through in your mega themes to me that I don't know how we deal with, but the concentration risk that we have to some of our partners. So there's high barriers to entry in some of these areas, and the very large mega funds are out in front. We would tend to partner with in the private credit space, in the infrastructure space, in the sustainability space, in the private equity space. And I think we've dealt with some of that in private equity by moving to a co-investment model, but there's still a lot of concentration risk to who we partner with. And how do you deal with that going forward?
I think that's a question on the horizon. I would say today, if you looked at our top holdings and our partners, that's not the case. But you might even argue the flip side of it, that we might be sort of over-diversified across our partnership set. But I think that's a very, very important question. And one of the things that I think we've discussed before too is, and you mentioned this in co-investments, is it's going to, we're likely going to need to evolve how we structure the investments with these partnerships. And we've been having a healthy amount of dialogue with our partners on that.
Great.
And so that's one area. And the other is and I'll lean on June and the Total Fund Management team as well, is just making sure that we're assessing the interconnections correctly and making sure that we maintain a diversified suite of partners. Today, I might even argue the opposite, that we actually have a lot of diversification.
Great.
But it's something on the horizon to be more thoughtful of, particularly as the opportunity sets are evolving. And like you said, I agree with some of the organizations we've seen evolve, those organizations now are trillion-dollar organizations or more, and they're in multiple asset classes.
Right.
And they're very much on the forefront of these opportunities.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions, let's continue.
Great, thank you. Well, that was the second and final segment of the CIO report. So with no further questions. Oh, next slide.
We good? We good or are we continuing?
Oh.
There's a part 3, it turns out.
You know what? I took a couple weeks off to, and yeah, no, thanks for reminding me. There is a third part.
Okay,
and,
perfect.
I think on the back of, Harry had mentioned this during our preview pre-board call that, there is a number of changes within the leadership team. And I wanted just to talk about some of the additions we've made here in a very important area. You know that diversity, equity, inclusion is one of our top 3 priorities within the investment division. And so here's a snapshot of the governance of diversity, equity, inclusion, or our DIMI strategy as we refer to it in investments. One, the senior management team, including myself and Geraldine, Mike DeRay, June Kim, Kirsty Jenkinson and April Wilcox, the senior management team, we are overseeing this effort across the entire investment branch. We also have a dedicated diversity steering committee consisting of many of our directors and leaders within the organization as well. And remember, we've tried to do that to make sure that we have appropriate leadership across the entire branch and involvement. And so it's not just one person like the CIO, but it's essentially across and it's part of the entire organization. And here I just wanted to note that we have added some new talent. Sarah Maley was promoted to the portfolio manager of strategic initiatives. So she's spending a bulk of her time helping to oversee DIMI and our investment officer, Lachey. And then Aisha, in her new role as the senior portfolio manager of CIS, is also spending time, particularly on the communication front and other areas that we need bolstering within our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So that's the third part that I missed, but I apologize for that, and I wanted to see if there are any questions in how our governance. But you see, again, this is an area where we believe is one of our priorities, and we're trying to resource it along those lines as well.
Go ahead. Okay, Karen?
Hi, thank you. Just a real quick question. Who are the observers?
So those observers are, thank you, June, is Mike and Kirsty.
Okay. Mike and Kirsty?
Yeah, Mike DeRay.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that I just a little background, one of the things I wanted to do as I assumed the role as the new chief investment officer is make sure that every member of the senior management team was also part of the steering committee as part of their oversight role. And so we added those 2 members as observers.
Okay, but they have a vote.
I don't believe they have a vote.
Okay.
But you see it that the senior management team does have oversight of the entire effort, including the steering committee.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing? Okay. Okay, that concludes our questions.
Great, thank you. I don't believe there's a 4th item, but I'm looking back. Okay.
Are there any public comments for item number 6?
There are no members of the public in the queue.
Terrific. Item number 7, Shared Vision RMS Strategic Review. Geraldine, Stephen, and Carrie.
seen Carrie in a long time.
No, we haven't.
That's okay.
Good morning. Geraldine Jimenez, Senior Investment Director, Public Markets. I may have a little career risk. I did ask my boss to step back, so I needed more
you can have a
seat, but hopefully I'm here at your next meeting. So Scott Chan, as part of his new role, has started a visioning of everything across the investment branch to look at what's it trying to do, what's its objective, how is it done, what has changed in the marketplace, and what could we do differently going forward. So the risk mitigating strategies is the first component coming forward. Today, you're going to see this. Mostly today is going to be on an educational component because its objective is very different than many other asset classes. And so I'd like to introduce Stephen Tong, who is actually one of our longest standing employees in the investment branch. When he was over the innovative portfolio, he created this strategy. And in 2015, you as a board approved it. And so it's coming on its 10th year, so it's perfect time to review. And so I'll turn it over to Stephen to introduce his team and walk through the presentation.
Thank you, Geraldine. Before we begin with the presentation, I just want to introduce you to some key individuals that are really associated with the RMS program. So I'll begin to my extreme left. Mika Malone not only serves as part of your general consultant from Makita, but she also serves an important role that she's the oversight consultant for the program. And just to refresh your memory, she does provide semi-annual reports to the investment committee on the 3 Ps of people, process, and performance. And then I want to move on from there. I want to introduce you to somebody you probably haven't seen before, but to my immediate right is James Walsh, and he works for Allborn. Allborn actually serves as a key important partner for the RMS program. And their role is that they help us with, they act as an advisor, but they help us with the strategy search as well as a manager search and selections. But they also play an important role in helping us think about portfolio construction and also has input on the rebalancing process. And then last but not least, I want to introduce you to Carrie Lowe to my extreme left. Many of you know her well, but I just want to reiterate what her role is. And she's actually been with the program since the inception in July of 2016. Currently, her and another colleague of hers, they serve as portfolio managers. And in Carrie's role, she actually oversees the 2 buckets that we identified in the written report, the defensive portion as well as the diversifiers. So with that, Carrie has a brief presentation, which she'll go through.
Thank you. Slide 1. The next slide, please. To kick off, over the past 10 years or so, the RMS team has grown from basically Stephen and me to 14 talented individuals managing $35 billion or 10% strategic allocation of the total fund. Today, we are going to review why RMS was designed, how RMS has performed, and what's next for RMS. First, why was RMS designed? It ties directly into CalSTR's investment beliefs. These beliefs are the foundation for how we achieve our fiduciary goals. Belief 1, diversification strengthens the fund. Enough said. Belief 6, managing short-term drawdown risk can positively impact CalSTR's ability to meet its long-term obligations. Next slide, please. Related to Belief 6, in November of last year, CalSTR's actuarial team very clearly and effectively showed how investment-related risk is the total fund's biggest risk. Reducing losses, protecting capital. That improves CalSTR's ability to pay its benefits. Specifically, RMS aims to perform when equity markets draw down more than 20% over a period of 3 months. Its objective is to protect a lot like insurance, but without an explicit premium. Next slide. So how has RMS done since inception? Simply put, RMS achieved its objective of protecting CalSTRS capital. Since its inception in July of 2016, there have been 2 episodes where equity markets drew down more than 20%, almost 25% in each case. In 2020 with the COVID pandemic, and in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine and high inflation exacerbated the markets. In both cases, RMS generated nearly 6%. RMS is unique in that it can perform in those extreme equity drawdowns. Moreover, in 2022, RMS provided more than $2 billion of capital to CalSTRS to invest in other areas and pay its benefits. So what does this mean for the bottom line? Next slide, please. This is the most important slide in the presentation. CalSTRS performance and actuarial teams conducted an analysis of how CalSTRS total fund would have done without RMS and had invested in fixed income instead, another diversifying defensive asset. As expected, RMS made very little difference in those years where returns were good. The benefit could really be seen in the poor returning years. Since 2016, and when RMS was created, there has been one fiscal year when CalSTRS lost 1.3% in 2021 to 2022. If CalSTRS had invested in fixed income instead of RMS, that loss would have been more than 3%. That 1.8% improvement meant $5 billion improvement in the funding status for the total plan. RMS did its job. Next slide. But we won't rest on our laurels. RMS must continue to evolve to effectively and efficiently meet its objective. Markets continue to change, CalSTRS continues to grow, and all of these present challenges and opportunities for RMS. Some of the areas that we can improve on are how we implement the program and access strategies, the mix of strategies we include and how we allocate to them, and how much of the profit we retain. We'll get to more specifics in closed discussion, in closed session on this. And as RMS navigates this evolution, there's one thing that we want to maintain is that our governance structure remains with oversight from Makita, advisory services from Allborn. And in summary, RMS was designed to protect CalSTRS capital. It met its objective, and it must continue to evolve. You've received a lot of information today, but if you remember one thing from this presentation, it's that defense wins games.
Yes, it's less of a question, more of a statement. When friends of mine found out I was joining this board, we were talking about sort of our ability to weather significant market changes in our personal portfolios. So they were interested to find out, well, what does a $352 billion fund do during significant market turndowns? And I had done enough reading to tell them a little bit about RMS. And having seen the presentation, I just want to commend the staff for being sort of insightful in advance, and obviously going forward, because we're likely, if Scott's right, we're going to have another market downturn, or volatility anyway. So with that, again, I just think it's wonderful that we have the ability to weather the downside. That certainly we're going to take a hit if it's significant, but as you've shown, we're able to actually limit pretty dramatically what the downside is. So thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Manis.
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful if we do have Allborn as our consultant and Makita in their enhanced oversight, maybe to comment also on how they think.
You read my mind. Mr. Walsh.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me here this afternoon. I'm here with my colleague, Tala Hatchkell, who's one of the people who works on the CalSTRS team. In our opinion, I mean, this is a very well-constructed portfolio. It's been very well put together, and it's proved its worth in the sort of 2 occasions so far that we've had where it's been called upon. As Carrie noted in the paper, CalSTRS was one of the first organisations to put this sort of portfolio together. We've seen quite a lot more happen and been put together since then. Obviously, we can talk about why that is. I mean, I think initially it was because interest rates, Treasury yields were low. Now, actually, Treasury yields are higher, but we're concerned about where Treasury yields may go. And I certainly concur with the concern that whilst we don't put a portfolio together expecting a drawdown, the risks of a drawdown clearly are not insignificant today. We as Allborn have 3 roles we play. One, as Carrie's mentioned, we provide independent opinion on the managers that go into the portfolio. So that's on an investment due diligence and an operational due diligence perspective. We also support in terms of portfolio construction and portfolio management. That's month to month in terms of rebalancing, but also longer term, thinking about what's the build up of the portfolio that most reflects what CalSTRS is trying to do. And finally, and I think very importantly, we work with the team in terms of looking at getting best value for money in terms of fees. So we work with the team when it comes to fee negotiation, and that in part is about keeping fees low, but it's also about making sure that the shape of fees is right in terms of aligning incentives between yourselves and the managers. So I think fees are always an important part of the conversation. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mika?
Great. Thank you, Mika Malone with Makita. If I could add just a couple of things to the conversation from our perspective, I think Carrie, Stephen, and the team have outlined all of the foresight that went into developing this program early when it was not commonly used across portfolios, took a lot of effort. You've built up a team of professionals that I think have probably unrivaled now experience building an RMS program. It's important from my perspective to highlight that each of these programs for other groups that use RMS as well, and for CalSTRS specifically, it's a lot more complicated than building, for example, a core fixed income strategy where the marketplace agrees that there's a couple of benchmarks that are widely utilized, or in a global equity portfolio, we all can sort of point to the MSCI ACWI. In RMS, you have to think about what that liability stream here at CalSTRS looks like. What are we trying to protect against? And then how can you use those defenders and those diversifiers for CalSTRS to build the type of durable portfolio that doesn't just do what we hoped it would do over the last 10 years, which I think this memo and presentation highlights very effectively that it has, but now how can you make sure that that mix is appropriate for the next 10 years? And how do we then assess its success over that time period? And I think that's where the marketplace is growing, and there still is no single best solution for creating a portfolio like this, but we do have more evidence, more examples of how these portfolios are constructed. So part of our role is to take a look at what those peer groups look like, how they've performed, and help your staff assess whether there are any new ways of thinking about constructing this portfolio that might benefit CalSTRS and your beneficiaries in the future. So I'll conclude with that.
Ellen?
It's Alan Emkin, Makita. I think it's important to remember when this was created. This was created after the global financial crisis, okay? And there was the recognition that there was nothing structural to address a huge crisis. And that was the genesis of the program, not just for CalSTRS, but for anyone who was looking at it. The second thing is that this is not an asset class. It's just really important to remember it's not an asset class. It's a functional component of the portfolio designed to have a specific purpose, which most of the time will lag the rest of the portfolio, because we believe that you will be compensated by taking growth risk, and this portfolio is really not designed to capture growth risk. In fact, it's to be on the other side of that trade. And it has accomplished its objectives. The challenge is, as you grow as an institution, you have to keep putting more money into an asset class that doesn't have the liquidity that other components of the market have. So it's a bigger challenge. as you grow to put the money to work in an effective manner. And that's what your consultant and your staff and Mika try to accomplish.
Thank you. Mr. Gunning?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well said. That was actually my question, and putting James and Mika on the spot. Can you predict or can you share where you think RMS should go, or the next 10 years? Given Scott's 3 bullet points, is that a guide? I'm just curious what you're thinking is the next way to protect the fund.
Crystal ball.
A ball.
Thank you. No, that's fair. Thank you for that question. I think, we maybe talk more about that in closed session this afternoon, but I think there are obviously always things you want to do better, and there are always challenges and opportunities as a large investor that you are. You're a significant investor, you have a lot of capital to put to work. So some of those things we can talk about this afternoon.
And maybe I would just add that to me, there are a couple of factors at play. One, how is your portfolio different today than it was 10 years ago when we set up RMS? So what risks do we want to really balance against? And then 2, how are products and opportunities in the marketplace shifting, and how can you take advantage of some things today that may or may not have been available to you in the past?
Thank you.
Go ahead. Do you have anything to
If
add?
there's no more questions, I did want to summarize that we will have some more of the tough discussions about some of the trade-offs this afternoon. But in March, we will be back with some policy changes that we think will take us to that next phase in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the presentation. Are there any public comments on item 7?
There are no members of the public in the queue.
Okay, item number 8, total fund management overview, June Kim. And actually, I think there's more on the next page. No. Let's see. Oh, they put you all by yourself on the next page. Sorry.
All right. While the team is moving up, let me just provide a brief introduction. This is the first educational item on the Total Fund Management Division, but it's not going to be the last. So this is really just an introduction. We're going to be building this out over the next 3 years. And to me, the Total Fund Management Division is simply a natural evolution to some extent of the greater sophistication of our fund, right? As we move more into private markets, we've developed greater liquidity tools. We've been dialing into our cash flow management, how we're pacing, how we match that with our liquidity from public to private markets. And so to some extent, this is a natural evolution of that. We've also built a very solid foundation over the last couple of years in that process of pacing, liquidity management, and our asset allocation, which goes from year to year and quarter to quarter as we think about the opportunities and dynamically over the course of that. But my goal for the long term of this division is really to achieve 2 goals. One is to create greater value on a total fund level. Another lever to add alpha, and I think June she might get into that today, but our study of other organizations and how they've been able to produce that value over time, I think is quite significant. So this is an area that for us could be very significant for the future value. The second is I want to more and more build a flexible and dynamic portfolio construction approach that matches the dynamic shifts that we're seeing in the marketplace. And this goes into some of the things we discussed in some of the other sessions. So I think if we succeed again, this could be along the lines of creating the type of value that we did with something akin to the collaborative model, right? So I think that there's with that buildup, I'm happy to then introduce June as the senior investment director who was promoted into this role. I'm very excited for her and to see how she'll take this and lead this critical division for the organization. And so maybe with that interlude, June.
Thank you, Scott. Nice to see everybody. Good afternoon. I'm June Kim, the Senior Director of the Total Fund Management Division. I'm joined today by Josh Diedish, who is now a Senior Portfolio Manager within the Total Fund Management Division. You've seen him present before you many times. And we'll walk you through a brief educational overview. We welcome your input, and we want to make this as interactive and as helpful for you as possible. Scott did speak to this, and so I just wanted to lay out what the evolution has been and where we are today. We have had all these processes already in place. The functions themselves are not new. And the committee that's existed for a very long time, and you've heard of, is the RAC, Risk Allocation Committee, which is on the right. And that's the committee that I head up now. The new creations that have been created over the past 18 months are the Liquidity Committee and Pacing Committee. Liquidity Committee is headed by Geraldine Jimenez, and Pacing Committee is headed by Mike DeRay. So given the increase in allocation to private markets assets, that changes the liquidity profile of the total fund, where we have different sources of liquidity, different needs, and having a more structured process around this has been critical for us to be nimble, but also very responsive to the needs of the fund. And so the Pacing Committee helps put more of a roadmap around what our outflow needs will be from the private markets asset classes, and Liquidity Committee then takes that and puts a plan around how are we going to fund these needs. And so we come up with a plan for the calendar year. We're in the midst of creating the plan right now for 2025. RAC, the Risk Allocation Committee, still continues to discuss and make decisions around the positioning that we'll take at the total fund level, the tilts that we may take, the underweights, the overweights that get reported to you in the CIO report. So that's a bit about the governance. Let's talk about the team, the Total Fund Management Division. So this has been created with the existing risk team that was under Josh Diedish. And so we're a small yet mighty team of about 9 people right now, and we're actively building it out as we speak. There are 3 main functions that fall under Total Fund Management Division, or TFM, as all the acronyms we like to use around here. So if I could start you on the right-hand side of this at the 3 o'clock spot. Key function is risk management. Again, all of these have existed. We're formalizing it, centralizing it under TFM. Risk management, and then let's go around the circle clockwise. Asset allocation and portfolio construction. Again, this is something that you've done for years, one of the key responsibilities of the committee. And then enhanced balance sheet management, which is a newer function that we're building out, and Josh will speak more to it. And what's the point of all of these 3 areas? Is, as Scott said, to improve the risk-adjusted returns for the total fund. If we do this well, if we do it efficiently, we can lower the risks, potentially lower costs, and then the goal here is to add additional alpha across the total fund. I'm going to hand it over to Josh to go into just a bit more detail on each of these 3 areas of focus.
Great, thanks, June. So I was just going to take about a minute for each of the 3 verticals as part of this team and talk a little bit about just what we're doing now, the history, and then where we're going and how it connects with this broader objective of improving risk-adjusted returns for the fund. So for the risk management sleeve, this really is kind of where my roots are in this the TFM team, and with a couple of folks on the team, Angela Tran and Matt Topel in particular, who have been with us from the very beginning. But we've spent quite a bit of time building the infrastructure for that team, and you see the output of that in a couple places now. The portfolio risk report that comes with Scott's CIO report, that's produced by our team. The risk budgeting that we've done with the public equity and fixed income teams, sort of as on these steps that we've been taking to more fully integrate risk into the decision-making process. But where we're really going is to build on that in a significant way, and it's a real focus on the risk in that risk-adjusted return equation, and really understanding where we're taking risk at a more detailed level, and ensuring that we're getting compensated, that the fund is getting compensated for the risks that we're taking. So that's kind of the first of the 3 pillars of this group. The second is asset allocation and portfolio construction. And we do have a fair amount of history here as well. The risk allocation committee, of course, that is internal and really has been focused on positioning in the fund and ensuring liquidity. But also for those who have been through an asset liability study, we've led the ALM for the fund asset liability management study starting in 2015 and again in 2019 and 2023. And so we'll continue to do those. But then the big change this past year and as we go forward, we'll really be looking to build on is the integration of the liquidity committee, the pacing committee, the way we make internal allocation decisions, and then bringing together that risk and return side of the equation to focus on improving the overall total fund risk-adjusted returns, looking across all the different areas of the portfolio, bringing these together and looking to ultimately maximize the benefit for the fund. And then the last area really is the newest. We've had a focus on things like liquidity risk in the past and understanding the liquidity of the fund and what we need. But as we go forward, for those who were here last year when we updated the investment policy statement for leverage and liquidity, really to hit these sort of 4 objectives that we talked about then, and it really is a driver of this, the ability to pay benefits, meet capital calls, rebalance the portfolio, and take advantage of market opportunities. This group is really focused on ensuring that we have the flexibility to do that. And so taking all of that in, integrating the liquidity projections and things that we get from the liquidity and pacing committee and pulling all of this together and tying it into our annual asset allocation planning. And again, sort of this big picture objective, it's all sort of linked to the improving risk-adjusted returns for the portfolio. So just wanted to take about a minute for each and talk about them, and then June can sort of bring us home here.
So I'm going to share with you an analogy to hopefully crystallize this. And it's right before lunch, so let's talk about some food. I love a good food analogy. We're going to call it total farm management. You also can be referred to as TFM. And so in this example, let's say that the farm, is CalSTRS. It's not a small provincial farm. It's a huge enterprise. It's quite complex, and it's invested in many different areas. We have a farmer. Let's call that farmer Scott. Okay, and you see, we've just outlined some of our asset classes and our areas of investment. The public markets on the right there, into crops and grains and different, vegetables, and then the private market class, private asset classes, since they have a different time horizon, we've made them livestock. And then you have CIS, so we want to make sure we're environmentally and conscious and sustainable farm. So we have a CIS group as well. So there's a few key things. You need well-defined goals and a plan. So we have production goals. We have a clear return target, right, for our fund, but you need clear production goals. It has to be effectively managed, and you have to have adequate resources and the right skill set. Expertise across each of these areas. So everybody within their areas has specialized expertise, and we want that to continue. And you also need the right technology and equipment to do it well and to do it effectively and efficiently. What ties this together is what's needed for each of these areas to produce and do well is actual liquidity. So you have the water in the middle, and that you need that for the crops to grow. You need it for the livestock and everything to continue. So you see the tie-in there with liquidity. But because this is such a large enterprise and a complex function, it's not just something where one group easily knows what the other is doing and it could just be coordinated, by maybe 1 or 2 people. It really is a centralized function run by a unit that can be beneficial for a complex organization like this in terms of the liquidity, in terms of if we're getting information from the specialized areas that, hey, this year my area may be a very opportune time to invest more, to lean into, or we're entering a harsh environment for our area and we may not have as many attractive opportunities. So a lot of collaboration with the different areas, but there has to be a centralized coordination so that we know, we want to tilt more towards here. We want to rotate our crops maybe more to this area or lean more into a different area so that holistically we could maximize the production, the output that we're getting from the entire farm. And doing this well, it will save on inefficiencies, which will save on costs. And the goal ultimately is to increase our efficiency in terms of production, in terms of our return, in terms of our alpha. So I'm going to leave it there and open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, June. I love the total farm approach because it looks at things holistically and it brings everybody together. I guess my question is this a big cultural shift for staff to move in this direction? How do you feel staff will embrace this and move forward? And is this an area we need to work on as well?
Thank you, Deborah. I'm going to start, and Scott, if you want to chime in. We think that this is another phase of the evolution, and the staff is well aware that we're in a period of, we've been in constant periods of change and evolution, and with the creation of the division, that certainly piqued everyone's interest. But in terms of what they can do on a day-to-day basis in their areas of expertise, that doesn't change. It actually frees up space and capacity for them to just focus there. And then the mega themes that Scott spoke to in his CIO report, there has to be a way to tie it together across the total fund. And so rather than taking from each of the divisions, we're certainly collaborating with them on the dialogue, on the information, on the expertise, but having your centralized division, we can be the coordinators to help with the communication, with that dialogue. We've started that exercise with each of the asset classes. We'll continue to do that. We have quarterly meetings right now. So it'll be another page in our evolution journey, but I think that it's a gradual enough change where as we communicate and dialogue that everybody's coming along.
Thank you.
Hey, Liz.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm always interested as well in a holistic approach, as Ms. Gallegos mentioned. And I know we talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious, as you are working on this holistic approach and building this team, what does it look like to make sure that this approach also really functions within the overall command and control within CalSTRS? I think any effort to kind of de-silo operations and build organizational understanding, it's always so important to do that in a way where you're maintaining organizational control and function of the whole fund. So just kind of curious how you've considered that and what the approach is.
In some ways, given the culture of CalSTRS, we've always been very collaborative. That's a key aspect of our culture. But as we grow, it's inevitable, right? Each group gets bigger and gets more specialization. So this is actually to keep up and to maintain that collaborative culture and to keep those channels of communication open. Now, as we have changeover and generational changeover in the fund, so that'll be part of it, is with the leadership and with the directors and of all the asset classes, is to maintain this culture and to keep it going. It's not dependent on one person. That's the thing. It's really embedded throughout.
I think one of the key questions here, I center around risk. Is and I think we talked a little bit about this with Deborah's question earlier, as we have divisions now who are all investing in similar themes, right? I have 5 different divisions who want to invest in private credit. I have every division investing almost in energy transition. We have to think about holistically, well, how much risk do we want to take as an organization in that theme, and to make sure that we're not concentrating around partners, or that we are concentrating partners in some cases to leverage further costs and influence. So I think that this all fits together, but from my vantage point and your vantage point, it's really holistically too a better way for us to systematically manage our risks. And this is tied into, you'll hear further as we talk about the evolution of CalSTRS 2 on a technology front. How can we incorporate better technology to help facilitate this feature as well? Bringing in that item as well, because to me, this command and control, I think is a term we don't use often, but I think what we're endeavoring to do is just be a lot more systematic, understand where our risks are, and as June was saying on the farm team, understand also where we're placing our bets. right? And this is something that's really been an evolution. I think the team has seen the issues quite clearly. It started with the cash flow issues as, just even 2.5 years ago, we weren't getting exits or cash flows coming in from our private markets. And so that took a different turn than how do we allocate the scarcer resources we have, right? So we need to centralize that and come up with an appropriate allocation. So in that case, we wouldn't overspend our budget, right? So a lot of this is becoming more centralized in a way, but it's to benefit each of the divisions and the total because we can give clear directions.
Thank you.
Steve.
Yeah, I don't know that the public knows that this was an item that was teased in our report looking at our big three items. And so I just want to say that June delivered on making something that can be very complex, very straightforward, and I'll use the word simple, but not in any kind of derivative way. And I would encourage for future discussions and future meetings, analogies always help. Mm-hmm. So again, encourage the staff to think about that as we go forward. This is perfect. Thank you very much.
I don't know though, June, I think that we need a little sunshine on the top right. It says the board.
Yeah, where are we?
I'm just teasing. We're part of CalSTRS.
The teachers own it. The teachers own the farm, and you're the ones who have to you're the governance.
No, that was very, very good, and thank you for making it so understandable. I don't see any other questions or comments. So are there any public comments on item 8?
There are no members of the public in the queue for item 8.
Okay, sorry, I did not check with Mika and Alan. Are you good?
We're approaching lunch, so I'm going to be really but there are a couple of things why I think this is even more important today than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And that is, as more and more people work remotely, the business challenge of getting them to work together collaboratively becomes a bigger and bigger management task. And having a component, in addition to Scott, working on making people work together is really important. And coincident with that is STRS is unique. You've got a group of people who grew up in STRS, who've evolved in STRS, and you're looking at them, and I have a list. It includes Scott, June, Josh, Geraldine, April, Stephen Tong. They've spent careers here, and that's unique, and that allows the culture to grow and be consistent, and this is an evolution of that process. And I just think it's important to keep that in mind, along with the fact that 15 or 20 years ago, you didn't need to worry about a balance sheet because you had more money coming in than going out. Well, for the rest of the lifespan of this institution, you're going to have more money going out than coming in, and it will become increasingly important to manage cash flow. That's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alan. You're good? Okay. Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 9. Thank you all very much.
Yay.
So next is the consent agenda, items 9 and 10. Did anybody wish to pull anything, or can we?
Nope, I move it.
Okay, Karen moved it.
Second.
Michael seconded. Roll call. That's okay.
Get my note here. Ms. Peralt?
Aye.
Ms. Gallegos?
Aye.
Mr. Tang?
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Aye.
Mr. Gunning?
Aye.
Mr. Ruffino?
Aye.
Ms. Sanders?
Aye.
Mr. Juarez?
Aye.
And I don't think we have anyone else on virtual? No. Okay.
Yes and yes.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, informational items. I don't believe we had any, but Steve, want to double check with you?
No official, no.
Okay, and then Scott, draft agenda for the next committee. Anything you want to highlight?
Did we, the consent items?
We already
Oh,
approved
they just
it.
said, okay, sorry about that. Yes, so just to pull in a few things about the next agenda out. Number 1, you might see the general consultant interviews. That applies to the chair investment committee and the vice chair of the investment committee only. So if you're If you're not them, then you can ignore that segment. They're the two that will be part of those interviews. The other item I'd pull out is the semi-annual review by our consultants. This is always a great opportunity to ask them questions. They'll do a thorough look back of the last 6 months. And the other item of note will be the RMIS Part 2. They're going to most likely bring a first reading of a policy. So those would be my current highlights.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, we will break for lunch. The board will be taking lunch from 12:30 to 1:30. Everyone else who's not involved in closed session will have until 2:30 because we are going into closed session from 1:30 to 2:30. So we expect to reconvene for open session or the next committee, I'm not even sure what's next, at around 2:30. Thank you all very much.